The Maple Leafs learned a hard lesson in last night's loss to the Panthers. What that was, we'll discuss on today's edition of the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Leafs podcast, a daily Maple Leaf-centric podcast hosted by myself, Mike DiStefano, and my co-host, Dave Morassutti. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Hopefully, Dave, you did not place your $5 wager on the Maple Leafs money line because it did not cash. The Florida Panthers defeated the Toronto Maple Leafs by a score of 3-2 last night. It was a close game, a close effort, but honestly, Dave, I don't feel great about how last night went. You look at the roster difference between the two teams. Toronto, they were lucky. They got Chris Tanev back, activated off IR. They basically had their full playoff-ready roster to rock last night against the Florida Panthers, who were missing Brad Marchand, Matt Tkachuk, and Aaron Ekblad, yet still were able to dictate and win the game 3-2.
Yeah, that was the disappointing part. It's like, oh yeah, it's a good Panthers team, but it's a Panthers team that doesn't have the star power the Leafs have. Currently as both
due
teams
to the injuries,
right?
Yeah.
Due to the injuries, and I thought with Chris Tanev coming back, a little bit more of a boost. Maybe the guys are feeling a little bit better. Started off pretty good, like can't argue against the start, and then the second period once again just continues to be one of the more frustrating periods to watch this team. Even though at one point in time the Leafs were one of the better second period teams in the league, and it just kind of the script is kind of reversed, has kind of flipped on them ever since. Maybe we'll talk since
the Four Nations tournament, really since they came back from Four Nations, because they had that really solid road trip right before, right, where they rolled through Western Canada and Seattle, and they looked good in Edmonton, looked good in Calgary, and they lost to Vancouver right before that, but they looked pretty good out on the road. But prior to that also, remember how poor they were playing at home? This is a long stretch of games where this team really has not gotten it going. You can look at the last 16 games, and the team's roughly 500 in that stretch. And this is something that I pointed out on Twitter, and I think this is a big reason for why the Maple Leafs are just a step behind, the top tier of the NHL, and why you look at this past week and you see why they lose to Colorado, why they lose to Vegas, why they lost to the Florida Panthers. And ultimately, I think it's just because we're learning that the Maple Leafs, as constructed, or the way that they're playing right now, they're just not there. They're just not at that level where the Stanley Cup champions and Stanley Cup contenders are at right now. That's kind of what I have learned over the course of the last week. When push comes to shove, when they're playing against the top tier teams in the NHL, like they have over the last week and a half, they just haven't been able to get the win and haven't been able to grind. They haven't been able to score, Dave. And that, to me, is the biggest concern of all. This team is having such a difficult time generating offense and scoring, and you're not going to win a lot of games if you can't muster up more than 2 goals a night.
Yeah, no, and I look at this as, where did the Panthers take advantage in this game, and where did the Leafs not take advantage, right? What 5-on-5, I feel like both teams were pretty equal in their play. But where it really sat in for me, and it continues to be the theme of the season, you've talked about it so many times, special teams, right? Power play, Leafs had their opportunities. Penalty kill unfortunately didn't do its job in the 2 opportunities that the Panthers had, and the Panthers took advantage, right? That was really the difference of the game. And some people say, well, 5-on-5 is pretty good. Well, special teams has made or break how many times for this team, and it continues to be something that, especially the penalty kill, has really started to bother me. I look at the 2 goals that they scored. Both goals should not, like, the Leafs had the opportunities to prevent those goals from going in, and it's just bad coverage, not getting the guy in front. I understand it's kind of tough, but when I see what the Panthers do on their power play, there's really no reason why the Leafs can't do the same thing. It's not rocket science. And like from what I saw in the Panthers, go to the net, get yourself open, right? Find a way to free yourself up, right? You have the extra man. The Leafs, unfortunately, when you look at their power play, just 2 perimeter. And even said it was slow, not making enough quick passes. Reason why you make quick passes, you get the penalty killers moving. That's not what the Leafs did. There was no purpose to that power play last night. While the Panthers, you saw a lot more purpose out of them.
Yeah, and you saw fight and battles, and they won those little battles, all throughout the game. Think about the battle that Seth Jones went up at the point, right? Scott Lawton just, I don't know if it was a lackadaisical move, but he gets the puck off of Jones's stick up at the point, and instead of going hard after the puck and making sure you grab it before you get going, try to just a little, shove, poke it up, but instead, from his knees, Seth Jones is able to, with concentration, get the puck back for his team and keep the puck in the zone. And 10, 15 seconds later, it's in the back of the net. It's like, that's a battle that you got to win. And against a team like Florida, against Colorado, against Vegas, it's those little battles. And when you lose enough of them, right, you're going to lose the war. And that's kind of what we've seen happen over the course of the last few weeks here. And it's starting to really show that maybe this team isn't all that different than, Sheldon Keefe's team. They continue to make those same mistakes and continue to lose those little battles. And they're close. They're close. We've heard that for years, right? Mm-hmm. Every time they lose in round 1, we're close. We're right there. We're knocking at the door. And this was a 3-2 game. And this was a very close game last night. Granted, the Panthers very shorthanded. Imagine if they have Marchand, Tkachuk, and Ekblad at their service, how different things could be. But still, they were close last night. The problem is those few key mistakes and those lost battles and special teams tend to be the difference. And every time we break down a playoff series, Dave, that seems to be the same themes as well. Low scoring. What was it, 13 of the last 14 playoff games? They've only scored 2 goals or less. Like, again, last night, only 2 goals. They can't seem to win the special teams battle in the playoffs. They lost the special teams battle last night. The opposition's goalie seems to make one more save than our own, and we lose to the goalie. We're never had the best goalie in the game. Well, that was the case last night too. It's just last night's game was kind of a microcosm of what we've seen when the Leafs are in games like that was a playoff game last night, right? That had the feel of a playoff game. There was pressure packed. There was a lot of physicality. I think Florida had like 40 hits. And Toronto, they were right there, but they just can't seem to close. They can't seem to get over the hump. And it's just so disappointing in a game where Toronto could have took the lead in the division, and instead, couple lost battles, and now they're 3 points back, and they only have 2 games to make that up. And I don't know. It's just a little disappointing to see out of this team.
It's very disappointing. And again, because I talk about the start, right? The buildings, I felt like the building had kind of come alive. 2 moments, the Tavares goal and the Max Domi fight. Like, that should get any team going. And once again, I don't know what it is with this team. They can't seize momentum. Other teams find a way to seize that momentum. And they just haven't been able to do it.
No, and look, Domi, that was obviously a bright spot in the game. We'll get to that on the other side when we get to the good, the bad, and the ugly. And we'll see. They've got one more game this weekend, or another game rather this weekend. The final Battle of Ontario for the regular season. Still could possibly see the Battle of Ontario in the playoffs potentially, but we do got one more game, and that's tomorrow. I joined the boys of Locked On Senators, and we did a little bit of a crossover, so we'll play that for you guys in the third segment. But coming up on the other side, the good, the bad, the ugly, and some staggering statistics. What the hell is going on with Auston Matthews? That's all next here on the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
Today's edition of the Locked On Leafs podcast is brought to you by Trade Coffee. If you're like me, your mornings have to start with a good cup of coffee, but I got tired of selling for grocery store brands that just weren't cutting it. That's why I turned to Trade. And let me tell you, this coffee is next level. Trade is the #1 specialty coffee marketplace in the U.S., bringing you fresh coffee from over 50 of the country's top roasters. Their experts have taste tested thousands of coffees, curating 450 amazing roasts. Whether you're new to coffee or know exactly what you like, they'll handpick the perfect match for you. And I actually got one of them here. I went with the Blendo Stupendo from Sterling Coffee Roasters. It's actually really nice. It's got a nice aroma to it, and that's what makes Trade Coffee different than other brands. You can choose many different flavors, and they make sure that they tailor it for you. And if you don't love your first bag, no worries. Trade will replace it for free until they get it just right. So right now, Trade is exclusively offering our listeners 40% off your first order at drinktrade.com/LockedOnNHL. That's drinktrade.com/LockedOnNHL for 40% off your first order. drinktrade.com/LockedOnNHL. Today's show is also brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you just stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When I start using Monarch Money, I just realized how much I was spending on different things like food delivery. Now I can actually budget smarter and save more. And managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year.
Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. Mike DiStefano, Dave Morassutti with you. We're reacting to a Maple Leafs 3-2 loss to the Florida Panthers. A chance for Toronto to get a valuable 2 points and tie the Panthers in the Atlantic Division standings. Instead, they lose the game and now sit 4 points shy of Florida. There's still 2 games to go against the Panthers this season, so they can close that gap if they win out. They still have a game in hand as well. But last night certainly, didn't make you feel great about their chances of winning the division. It felt like last night was pretty key when it came to giving this team confidence moving forward, and unable to secure the 2 points. There was some good in the game, though. I thought the Maple Leafs played fine. They played well. I thought they played up to snuff with the Florida Panthers. So let's go through the good, the bad, the ugly of the game. What did you like about last night, Dave? What was good?
Oh, I mean, Max Domi was excellent. He understood the assignment. And I know he got a lot of flack earlier in the day about his comments about the importance of this game and winning the Atlantic. But that was take Ty Domi and elevate him more, because he actually scored a goal too. But that was such a throwback to watch him lay a beautiful hit. Then I'm sorry, Nate Schmidt. Oh boy, he got filled in. I felt bad. Yeah. When a guy loses a fight,
ragdolled him. It was embarrassing.
Yeah. And Max Domi is not a big guy. We know this, and Nate Schmidt's not small. That's
tough, though. He's tough. Yeah. He's a tough dude.
And that's what we need from Max Domi. That's what Max Domi was supposed to be all year long. And to me, one thing I criticize about all that is he should have been elevated up higher, or like after that point. Like,
Yeah.
Kramer should have found him a way to get him going more, because what he was bringing, the top six needed.
Well, I did notice that when I went to 6-on-5, Domi was out there with the extra attacker. He was the guy out there with the main group, and that was Berube noting that, okay, Domi's been the one who's moving and shaking. And yeah, I would agree. I mean, I saw in the third period they decided to put Scott Lawton on the second line for a couple of shifts, try him out on the wing with Tavares and Nylander. Again, that would have been a time to try Domi for me. But anyways, I'm not the coach. But yeah, I had the exact same good. Like Max Domi last night, that was his best game of the season by far. Big time hit to start things off, gets a fight, and then scores a goal. Took advantage of a bad change by Florida. And hey, Max, looks what happens when you shoot the puck, pal. You should try that a little more often.
And use your speed, right?
Use your speed and shoot the puck. And look, rush offense has been abysmal for the Maple Leafs this year. Like, if it's not a Nylander breakaway, they're not really scoring much of anything off the rush this year. I think that's been a big reason for why this team has failed to generate as much offense as well. And it's just, partly is because it's just a different system offensively than what Sheldon Keefe was out there preaching to the guys. But yeah, it just goes to show that that's an element of the Maple Leafs offense that they've missed. And I just hope Domi can build off this, because there's been games where it's like, okay, Domi had a good game, and then he'll go quiet for the next 10, right? Like, that's been the issue with Domi, right? He went goalless in his first 20 games of the season. Then he scored in 3 straight games, and then he went goalless again in 20 straight. Then he scored, and then he hadn't scored again in 15 games. And it's like, gee, that's not what you're paying this guy nearly $4 million for. What he did last night was what they need. He can lay a big hit when you need it. If you need someone to drop the gloves and, knuckle up, Domi could do that. And every now and then, I'm not saying he needs to be a 30-goal guy, but he does need to have, score more than 5. Can he be a 15 to 20-goal guy? That's what the Maple Leafs need out of him. And last night, for sure, he was one of the best Leafs out on the ice. He had some jump. He had some juice. And hopefully he can continue that into the Battle of Ontario this weekend and find some level of consistency here down the stretch and into the playoffs, because that's the style that they needed to be playing come April and into May and hopefully into June.
It's exactly. Those are the types of players you need to step up in those moments. And I just kind of hope that Domi is starting to understand it. Hopefully the coaching staff is reiterating that message, because I do think that maybe the message just doesn't get there all the time with them, because we've seen it in spurts, and maybe consistency has been an issue for him, but maybe just the messaging needs to be reiterated, and maybe a little more. And this is why I say, if he does something like this, reward him, right? Kind of reward him with playing in the top 6, right? And getting him out there a little bit more. I think that's just been something missing from him, is just that consistency. We don't expect him to score every night, but as you said, 15 to 20 goals, and showing them there's more to him than what we have seen. That's the big one.
The good, what was good or bad? Sorry, what was bad about last night's game?
Bad. Yeah, I know we're gonna talk about him. Maybe I'll save it for the ugly. I mean, it's both bad and ugly. But Auston Matthews, I know they were generating chances, but I'm at the point where generating chances isn't enough. You gotta, you're a premier goal scorer. Those pucks have got to go in the net, man. Find a way, get to those dirty areas. It's not happening for him, and I understand there's an injury there. I understand it's been hampering him. Then maybe you got to talk to the coaching staff and figure out what you need to do better. And he's playing a lot of minutes. It's not like, whatever injuries he's dealing with isn't keeping him off the ice, because he's playing more than ever. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe they're pushing it too much and they have to scale it back with them. I don't know, but that, like, when we're talking about that not being able to get that offense going, it's because your best goal scorer isn't scoring.
Right. And that's a big problem for this team. And yeah, I think he only had like 2 shots on net last night. Granted, like he had a couple of good chances, like you said, but we're at a point in the year where we're 65 games in. Chances and looks aren't really what we're looking for. We're looking for goals and conversion. And this has been a stretch unlike what we've ever seen with Auston Matthews. The last 16 games, and that dates back to January 23rd. Auston Matthews has 1 goal at 5-on-5 in that stretch. 1 singular goal at 5-on-5. He only has 3 in general.
Yeah.
Like 3 since January 23rd. That's 3 in the last 16 games, one of which was an empty netter, and only 1 at 5-on-5. Like, I get it. There's been a lot of a lot of words said about this, but to me, he's just got to start scoring. Like that at the end of the day, it is a big problem right now for this team, but it's not just Matthews. Like it's just offense generation in general has been poor, and it's tough to always generate offense against Florida. They're one of the best defensive teams. They pack the middle of the ice. They make it very difficult for you to get to the scoring areas. Like the Maple Leafs, you look at it ever since that streak started for Matthews, the last 16 games as a team, they're second last in expected goals per 60 minutes to only the Chicago Blackhawks. They're ranked 31st in expected goals since January 23rd. Like that's just an entire team struggling to produce any amount of offense. And that's just simply not good enough for a group that has playoff and hopefully Stanley Cup aspirations. And the guy at the top, the guy who's supposed to be the head of the snake, Auston Matthews, isn't getting it done.
Yeah, he's not getting it done. And at some point, you wonder if they need to give him some time off to kind of get back on track, because they did it earlier. I'm not saying give him 10 games off, right? Like or anything like that. But I do think that they need to find a way to give him a reset. Do they? When we talk, and this is not. I'm not saying that this needs to happen, but if it's something that the team needs to consider, give him a game off. Let Max Domi play up on the top line for a couple of games just to give Matthews a break if he needs a few games off, right? Like you've now got Scott Law and you've got that third center, right? That can help. This was what he was brought in to do, was if you have injuries or you need to spread the minutes out, you got that other center there, so you might as well take advantage of it if Matthews needs a break. So I wonder if it gets talked about. It was talked about, I think, a little bit more. I mean, you brought it up, and I'm sure other people brought it up. I'm surprised nobody's asked Craig Berube about Auston Matthews' his play the last little bit.
Well, what's he going to say? Like, he's getting his looks, he's getting his chances. He's just been unlucky. He just hasn't been able to bury. And it's true. But for a guy who scored 69 goals last year and has been the best 5-on-5 goal scorer since he broke into the league, this has never been an issue. So it does kind of make you wonder, is Matthews being held back by Berube's system? So if that's the case, I mean, either Berube's got to come out and say, I've got to do a better job of getting him in better situations. I don't really know what Berube could say at this point, but we'll see. Again, tomorrow they're taking on the Ottawa Senators, and well, let's hope that he snaps that streak, because 1 goal at 5-on-5 in 16 games, dude, that's a big reason why this team has not played very well and has lost a lot of games in that stretch. Speaking of the Ottawa Senators, Dave, on the other side, we'll be joined by the Locked On Sens boys, or I joined them for their podcast, and we'll play that conversation we had teeing up Leafs and Sens. That'll be next here in the Locked On Leafs podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you a chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets. I've got my eye on a few underdogs this year, and FanDuel makes it easier to back them with spreads, totals, and game props. With tournament games happening almost every day, there's always something exciting to bet on, and the FanDuel app is simple to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on college hoops action all tournament long. Today's episode is also sponsored by Farm to Fork. If you're a fan of premium, locally farmed meats delivered straight to your door, I've got some exciting news. Farm to Fork makes it easy to get high-quality steaks, air-chilled chicken, wild-caught seafood, and more with no antibiotics, hormones, or GMOs. Plus, everything comes flash-frozen, individually packaged for your convenience. All Farm to Fork meats are raised on Canadian farms, so when you order, you're supporting local producers. It's time to buy Canadian. Farm to Fork's meats are top-notch. I've had some amazing steaks that were tender, juicy, and perfectly cooked. The chicken is air chilled. It's so fresh and more flavorful than anything that I've gotten at the grocery store. And now they're delivering all across Ontario and Western Quebec. And the best part, delivery is free with a minimum order of $199. You don't even have to leave the house to get this quality. And I've got a special code just for you Locked On Leafs listeners. Use Locked On 40 to get $40 off your first order at Farm to Fork. Visit farmtoforkdelivery.ca to start stocking up on the best meats around. Again, that's Locked On 40 for 40% off your first order. Farm to Fork, delicious, locally farmed meats delivered straight to your door.
All right, Pillsy, so now it is time to look ahead to tomorrow, the final Battle of Ontario this season, and the Ottawa Senators are going for the sweep. It's kind of unfortunate, though, eh? Only 3 games head-to-head this season?
Yeah, that's not enough, but Ross, maybe there's more in the future. We don't know yet.
Oh, we'll ask our next guest. We bring on recurring guest, friend of the show, the reason why Locked On Senators exists today, as it is, from Locked On Maple Leafs, Mike DiStefano. Fella, what's going on, man?
What's happening, fellas? I'm excited as everyone else is for the Battle of Ontario. I mean, guys, you and I, like, we're all the same age here, where, you know, late 20s, early 30s. We witnessed the Battle of Ontario really kick things off in the 2000s, but we haven't had it since. I feel like it's back, boys, because for the first time in, well, what seems like literally 20 years, we got 2 teams in Ontario battling as they head into the final stretch into the playoffs. This is a valuable 2 points up for grabs tomorrow night.
Yeah, the Leafs going for the division title. Ottawa trying to continue to pull away from the pack of Columbus and the New York Rangers in that second wildcard spot. I mean, Mikey, 2 weeks ago on Locked On NHL, you and I do that every Wednesday together. We both said Ottawa and New York, the Rangers. Those are 2 teams at the end of the day that we believe will be the wildcard teams. You feel as confident today, if not more, than you did 2 weeks ago?
Well, I certainly feel more confident in your Senators. I mean, they're one of the hottest teams in hockey. Like 5 straight wins. You got a goalie who's making miraculous saves. Like last night on Mason Lohrei, I'm sure you guys have spent, 48 minutes talking about that on this podcast. So, yeah, I mean, I feel great about your Sens. I think they are definitely playoff bound. They're going to break that, 7 years now where they haven't made the playoffs. I think that drought's coming to an end. Brady Tkachuk talked about, him not playing in many big games, and that Canada-USA matchup was the biggest game that he had played coming into, that Four Nations tournament. Well, I think he's about to play a couple big ones coming up in a couple of weeks here.
Mike, how sick is this photo from USA Today?
That's pretty sweet, actually. That's quite. I mean, it's not as nice as the Simone Benoit Superman punch photo. Don't know if you guys saw that one. Pretty sick photo. Not gonna.
Well, that'd be the equivalent of Ullmark diving and not catching the puck, because Benoit was a great dive, but he didn't connect.
Yeah, but the picture, you can't tell he didn't connect. It's a sick photo. But that also pretty sweet. That's save of the year caliber. That's a big time save. And look, I gotta hand it to you guys. I clowned a little bit on the signing, or at least I wanted to wait and see how it turned out, the Linasol market. It's been an up and down year for him. I think you guys can even, admit that with the injuries and whatnot. But he's starting to come into his own, and it looks like the Sens finally got a goaltender and might lead him to the playoffs.
So, Mikey, what's the angle from the Leafs side of the table here when it comes to a Battle of Ontario in the playoffs? Because a lot of Sens fans are hungry for it. They want it. But I feel like for the Leafs, it's a little bit of low reward, high risk. Like if you beat them, well, you've been, like we talked about, the old Battles of Ontario, the Leafs have beaten the Sens how many times in the playoffs? So if you beat them again, it's like, well, yeah, we beat them again. But if you lose, then that's where it's tough for the Leafs. Where do you land on that?
I think it's going to be tough whoever Toronto plays in the first round, realistically. I mean, often the Leafs beat themselves, realistically, in round one. So whether it's Ottawa, whether it's Tampa, whether it's Florida, or whoever it ends up being, Washington, or whoever it ends up being in round one, it's going to be difficult. I personally would love to see it. Like I'd like to see it happen. Relive that old rivalry from my childhood and see these two teams go at it in a 7-game series. I want it to happen, and I think it's less likely to happen after last night's loss for the Maple Leafs. They're now 3 points back of Florida. They still have 2 games to go in the season. They still got a couple games. I think those are going to be big deciders, but the way that Toronto's been playing of late, it hasn't been great. Meanwhile, Florida just continue to put points up on the board. So I think they're probably going to end up pulling away. And unfortunately, unless Ottawa can leapfrog Tampa, I'm not sure we'll end up seeing that as a round one anymore, which really is kind of upsets me.
Yeah, me too. I think that, well, one, it'd be great for content. I mean, our shows would boom for those 2 weeks. There's no doubt about that. No disrespect to the hockey fans down in Florida, but I don't think it has the same pizzazz as the Battle of Ontario would obviously have. Now, the Leafs, obviously, they lost last night, but the lineup's looking pretty solid after the trade deadline acquisitions of Scott Laughton and Brandon Carlo. We're expecting the lineup to look like this. Auston Matthews with Matthew Nyes and Mitch Marner. John Tavares centering Calle Jarnkrok and William Nylander. Scott Laughton centering Bobby McMahon and Max Domi, who had a great fight last night against Nate Schmidt. Bit of a different level of fighter between those two guys. And then David Camp for the fourth line with Pontus Holmberg and Steven Lorenz. On defense, Morgan Riley's getting the assignment next to newly acquired Brandon Carlo. Then you've got Jake McCabe with Chris, not Brandon Tanev. And then Simon Benoit with Oliver Ekman-Larsson. Stolar's back from injury. He was still out the last time the Senators and Leafs played in Ottawa. Joseph Woll got the start in that game. He is expected to back up. What in this lineup are Leaf fans looking at as a key to victory on Saturday against Ottawa?
A couple things. I think ultimately they got to score. I mean, we're looking at a Leafs team that has really struggled to put the puck in the back of the net, especially on home ice, which is very peculiar, but one of the worst teams. They're about a 500 club on home ice over the last 6 weeks or so, and they really have a tough time scoring more than 2 goals. So they got to score, and it's Auston Matthews. It's kind of the player that a lot of people are looking at right now. He's a guy who scored 69 a year ago. Guys, he's got 3 goals in his last 16 games. 1 was a power play goal. 1 was an empty netter. Just 1 in his last 16 games. 1 at 5-on-5. That is the one thing that Maple Leaf fans need to see from a guy like Auston Matthews, the captain. He's got to put pucks in the back of the net. And, hey, if there's one team Auston Matthews likes to fill the net against, we know it's your Ottawa Senators. Just go ask your boy Erik Karlsson. So if there is a team and there is a night for Matthews to get back on the board and get going, I think tomorrow kind of would be a storybook kind of fitting ending to the slump he's been in.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a Leafs comment because you're looking at those early games in his career, just like regular season. Auston Matthews has 1 goal in his last 11 games against the Ottawa Senators.
Oh, trust me, I'm well aware. He will not be on my FanDuel best bet for
1 goal. Sorry, he did get 1 goal. 1 goal, 1 assist in the same game there. But yeah, 1 goal in the last 10 games, Matthews against Ottawa. Pilsy, your final question for our guy Mike DiStefano. Go check out Locked On Leafs for more on their angle of this weekend's game.
Yeah, final question for me is the Leafs are going to be wearing their St. Pat's jerseys, the white and green. I feel like maybe this is just my Sens bias peeking through, but I feel like whenever they wear those up against the Sens, it doesn't go well for them. Do you know, or do you have an idea of what the Leafs record is in the St. Pat's jerseys? Like, does that give you confidence, or are you like, oh, no, not this again?
Actually, funny, I don't know what their actual record is, but yeah, I've got a recollection of some L's that they've definitely taken wearing that jersey. So I would imagine that they've had more losses than wins in that jersey. Just trying to think back over the years how many W's they've had. I think they had one win against Carolina in like a high scoring game where they wore that jersey, which is, good to see, I guess. But outside of that, I'm trying to think. But yeah, I suppose that's not a good omen, but
do you like them? Like, do Leafs fans like that, or is it kind of played out?
They're the dumbest. Also, if you look at the back of the jerseys, the way that they have like the coloring on the numbers, it's so bad. Like, I feel so bad for Joe Bowen having to call those games on the radio.
Yeah.
There's no one who hates those jerseys more than Bonesy. He hates them because you just can't see the numbers on the back of the jersey. It's just so stupid. So I'm honestly not a big fan of them, no, personally. But there's a lot of people that are, and I'm sure they are selling a lot of those jerseys and will probably sell a hefty amount on Saturday.
I'm glad you wrapped up this segment talking about money, because we know the Leafs love talking about it and having all of it. Their payroll is always the highest in the league. But tomorrow, everyone will strap on the same skates, the same gloves, the same helmets, and battle it out for the final time this regular season. Hate the Leafs, love Locked On Leafs. Appreciate you, Mikey. Great insight into tomorrow's game. Enjoy it, and hopefully it's not the last time we get it this season.
I'm with you, man. I hope it's not. I wouldn't bet on it being another Battle of Ontario in the playoffs, but let's hope tomorrow's a good game for both of us, boys.